Hello and welcome to another Key Smash Studios video. Today we are going to be talking about setting up a lightning effect in Unity. Now this is a background lightning effect, meaning that there are no direct streaks, just kind of like a cool little ambiance thing you can add to your game if you so choose. If you find this video to be helpful, please consider liking, commenting, subscribing, all that jazz. It really does help us out, and we'll hop right into this. The first thing I'll say before I do anything is that I have just put together a really simple scene. It's not fancy at all. It's just some grass, some trees, and a skybox, as well as some rain particle effects. Now, when I hit play, what's going to happen is we're going to get sort of some of this background lightning, and that's what we're going to be working on today, creating this flash sound effect combo, and then we're going to talk about how you can implement it in your project. So in order to do this, we obviously need to have a script. And inside that script, we're going to use a few different things. You'll notice that in the scene of Unity that I had, there were a few audio sources and a few directional lights. Now these directional lights have been changed. I've given them a slightly blue color, and I've given the audio sources a thunderclip. If you need any help on how to set up any of that stuff, let me know down below. I'm always more than happy to help. But the audio source is just a random Thunder sound clip I found off the internet. It does not matter. It's not perfect for this thing. You'll need to find one that's a little bit better for your product based on the length of the clip and how frequently you want lightning and all that jazz. But this is just a quick one that I found off the internet just so I could have the sound effect play with the lightning. The three different directional lights all point in different directions. If I turn them all on, you'll see that the scene becomes quite bright. But if I rotate a little bit, we can see that all three actually have a different direction. And this is so when we have shadows that's created by the lightning creates shadows in different directions. So I'm going to turn all these off because the lightning effect comes from quickly turning them on and then off. And that's how we create that little flash of lightning, sort of like a non-streak lightning that you don't really see the streak, but it still brightens the sky, and then you hear the thunder. So in order to use that in our script, we actually need to create a few public game objects. So we're going to create a public game object, and this game object is going to be called lightning1. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to create all three of those. So another public game object, lightning2, and finally another game object, lightning3. Additionally, since we have one audio source, I'm going to create an additional public game object called audio1, and that's for our single audio source clip. So these are the four items in the scene that we're going to use to make this effect happen. It's actually pretty simple, but we'll go over each step individually. So the first thing I want to do is create a void start, and we have a few things that we want to set here. First and foremost, we want to make sure every single directional light is off. So we're going to do set active to false for every single directional light and every single audio clip. The first thing we want this thing to do is make sure that it's not messing up our scene. So here we are, we're setting this one to false as well. And finally, lightning3, we're going to set active false. If I can spell, that would be great. Additionally, we want to make sure that our audio source is off. So audio1.setActive false. So now that we have everything turned off, we need to talk about how we want to make this happen. And we really need four functions to make this happen. First and foremost, we really need a way to call the lightning. So I'm going to make a function called callLightning. We also need a way to end the lightning, so I'm going to make a function called endLightning. And I'm going to properly format it. Similarly, we need a way to make sure that our audio clip starts and ends. So I'm going to make a function called play thunder. And then finally, we're going to make one called end thunder. You know what? I'm just going to call this call thunder, just so it is the same for everything. So now what we actually need to do is set up a way to select which lightning source we're going to use. As I mentioned before, we have 3 different lightning directional lights that we're going to set up. And the easiest way to pick from that is just to create a random number. So we're going to create a random.range. Int r is equal to random.range. And it's worth noting that this is an inclusive float. We're casting it as an int, but this is an inclusive float here. So we want this number to include a random number that we will use. So in this case, I'm going to be using 0. We will use 0. And then the second one is an exclusive range, meaning that it will not use the number that is there. It will use everything below that. So if I put a 3 here, we'll get an int that is random between 0, 1, and 2, but not 3. So we have a random number here. So all we really need is an if-else statement or a series of if-elses that call our lightning. So what we want to say is if r is equal to 0, then we want something to happen. Else if, and then all we have to do is say if r is equal to 1, then we want something to happen. And finally, we'll just put an else there because we don't need to say if r is equal to 2 if there's only 3. So here we've set up our 3 individual things. And all we need to do for each of these is to set our first, second, and third lightning to active. So our lightning 1, we're going to set this as active. Set that equal to true. So our lightning will turn on when we get a random 1 from call lightning. And similarly, in the second one, we want lightning 2 to be turned on, so we set that active to true as well, only if we roll a 1. And finally, lightning 3 is going to be turned on in a very similar manner. And that's great, but now we need a way to turn it off. All we need to do is just come up here to start, copy this lightning, and when the lightning ends, we're just going to make sure that every single lightning is off. Set it active to false, and that's what happens. When we call lightning, it turns on, and when we end lightning, it turns off. So what we actually need to do is make a call to end the lightning. Now, scripts run so quickly in Unity that we actually need to delay this just a smidgen so our human eye can pick it up. Typically, the human eye can start to pick stuff up in 75 milliseconds, something like that. So we actually need to have something that's turned on for a time greater than 0.075 f float. And once we know what that number is, we know that the human eye can pick up stuff faster than 75 milliseconds. We know our range of how long we need to have this lightning effect on. Once we know that, we can actually use a really cool function called invoke. And invoke lets us call a function a certain amount of time later. And we talked about how 75 milliseconds is what the human eye can say. So let's say we would do 125 milliseconds, 0.125 f. So 125 milliseconds later, it's going to call some function, and I just have to specify what this function is here. And luckily, I know that I want to specify that it's end lightning. So after this turns on, lightning 1, that first directional light, turns on. 125 milliseconds later, we call the function end lightning, and it turns off. Now, if you look at this, you can understand that you can start to do some really cool stuff where you turn it off and on and on and off again, where, like, you know, lightning's not usually just one flash, it's like a flicker, and I'm not going to get into that, but if your mind starts racing ahead of you, you can absolutely do that. Just use separate functions for each of the three of them, and you can make different lightning effects based on what it runs. You know, you could have a quick flash, or you could have like a long drawn out thing with like 3 flashes and a much longer thunder effect. But if your mind's racing, you can absolutely use this multiple times, and we will in fact use this multiple times. So what I'm going to do here is I am going to copy this and I'm going to paste it, and what we're just going to do is we're just going to change how fast it is for each one. So each individual lightning strike is a little bit different. So the third one being the fastest, second one being middle, and the first one being the longest. 75 milliseconds, 105 milliseconds, 125 milliseconds. Now we also have this thing where we call thunder and end thunder. So what we'd like to do here is play an audio source. So an audio source in Unity, if I come back here to Unity real quick, an audio source in Unity has this really cool function called play on awake. And when I set something active, I turn it on, it plays its awake function. In this case, it's playing this clip when it turns on. I have this turned down a little bit. I have its pitch changed a little bit, you know, something in the 0.9 range, 0.8 range will make the thunder a little bit deeper. But it's a pretty standard clip, and all I just have checked is play on awake. So anytime I turn this audio source on, it will play this effect. Now you can imagine in our scripts, we don't want that to always happen at the same time, but we still want to be able to call it without coding it 3 different times. All we do in our call thunder script is to turn it on. So audio1.setActive to true. So now when we call thunder, it turns on the audio, and similarly, all we have to do on our end thunder is to turn off the audio. So we're going to set it to false. Now I will start putting some timings in here, and it's worth noting that I am making it fast for the effect of the video. If you're doing this in a game, you should absolutely make this longer. No one wants to hear thunder every 3 seconds, every 5 seconds. Make it every 30 seconds, every 40 seconds. So there's like some ambiance to this. You don't have to deal with a clip, you know, running out of noise and getting cut early. So you'll see in a second when I set this up, the clip will get cut. But when you're making this longer and drawn out, the thunder clip won't get cut out because it's running out its entire duration as opposed to turning off and on early. So we have our coding for turning off and on thunder. All we need to do is mess with the timing of it. So when we have this flash, this first one that's like the fastest, we want to I just want to call the thunder, like it's right on top of you. The lightning's quick, it's right there. So all we need to do is call thunder, and we are done. Now, on the ones that are further away, I want to use a similar invoke process. And I want to make it wait just a couple more seconds. So here we're waiting a little bit to call the thunder sound, and you know, maybe we make this a little bit longer than the lightning's active. So there's like a little bit of a gap here. And after that gap, we hear the thunder sound. And we're going to take this same thing, and we're just going to put it up here with an even longer gap. So, you know, we're approaching a third of a second until we hear the thunder sound. So if it rolls a 0, we have this really long gap. If it rolls a 1, we have a medium gap. And if we roll a 3, there's no gap. So this is distinguishing between the 3 different lightning sources, the directional lights, but we're also creating a different effect on each one of them, making the audio play different. It's also worth noting that if you have multiple thunder sounds, you can absolutely copy this setup up here down to the thunder. Create a random, selected random thunder. Having a series of 12 different thunders that you can choose from makes it so the player doesn't ever really experience a pattern or notice a sound effect that's the same. And that's really powerful, but I'm not going to do that for a YouTube tutorial. So here we have our thunder working. We just need a way to turn it off. So we've called this thunder, and we need to figure out a timing in which we can turn it off so it's available for the next one, which means we actually need to figure out how quickly we are calling the lightning first. So at the end of call lightning, we need to call the next lightning strike. We want it to repeat at some point. And if you're doing your game, I would highly recommend this is a long period of time, 30, 40 seconds before your next one. But for the sake of the video, I'm going to make this 3.5 to 7 seconds. Let it be a little bit random here. So we're going to invoke, and we are going to call lightning. So the same thing we did with the thunder. We're going to call the lightning, and we're going to give it a time. Now that time, we can actually create a float to make this a little bit more random. So it's a little more spread out, there's no pattern. And all we have to do is create a float. Rand is equal to a random dot range. And again, we're going to be using the same inclusive then exclusive thing. So the first one, let's say a 3.5 second float, and then the exclusive one, maybe a 7.7 second float. That means at some point, it's going to play a sound, and I'm just going to assign this to rand. At some point, it's going to play a sound and a lightning effect, and then 3.5 to 7.6 seconds later, it's going to make the function start again, and it will play again. So now that we know that the fastest time that this can run is 3.5 seconds, we actually need to make thunder turn off before then, so we can not mess up the process. So what we're going to do is we're going to invoke end thunder, and we are going to give this the longest time we can, so we hear the sound effect as long as possible. In your game, this should be longer than the clip length. For example, I'm using a 12-second clip. In your game, that should be 13 seconds. And then we make sure that we don't call the lightning before 13 seconds. But in my case, since this is a video and I'm trying to show off the effect fast enough, I'm just going to put 3.4 seconds, so we will hear a little bit of a cut at the end of the thunder clip, and that's the audio being turned off. So 3.4 seconds later, we're turning off the audio, and then based on the roll, sometime 3.5 to 7.6 seconds later, we will hear a new lightning call. I just realized that I put this in the wrong thing. This should actually 100% go in the lightning. We want to call after we finish lightning, not before. So let's go over this again just to make sure we have everything we need. We call the lightning. It starts going through the process. It picks up one of these different directional lights, turns it on, and then turns it off some amount of time later that we can actually see with our human eye. Then we hear thunder. Some point later, it calls that thunder, and it calls this in lightning. Now the thunder plays its sound and turns off 3.4 seconds later. The lightning turns off the directional light, so we get that flash of light, and then it's gone. And then after some amount of time, 3.5 seconds or greater to 7.6, it calls the whole thing again. And the only thing we have left to do is to make sure that we call this initially. So in our start, what we're going to do is we're going to use invoke one more time. And this time we are just going to call lightning. And then we're going to give it some amount of time. I'm going to say 1.75 seconds into the scene playing, go ahead, call the first lightning. So now I'm going to make sure that we have everything we need assigned in Unity itself. So I've attached this to the main camera, and all we need to do is click and drag our lightning objects. So lightning 1 is lightning 1, lightning 2 is lightning 2, and surprisingly, lightning 3 is lightning 3. And finally, audio 1 is audio source 1. So now when I hit play, 1.75 seconds into it, what we'll hear is that thunder and the lightning. So that rolled a 2 on the random. It was fast, it was instant. There's one where there's like a little bit of a pause. That's the 1. And there's the 0. So you can see that it's randomly selecting the lightning. It's going through the effect. It's a little bit different for each one of these. Obviously, when you're creating this for a game and you're not doing it for a video to show it off quickly, you want to make these effects vary by much larger amounts. Instead of having it come in the first second and a half of thing, maybe have it come in 34 seconds in, and then, you know, have the range be 37 seconds to 78 seconds in between. So there's a much larger gap in between the thunder, but it creates this really great ambiance effect that you can just put in a scene. You don't have to worry about it. The script's entirely self-contained. You don't have to make calls to it from other scripts. It's just there, it runs, and you get this really great effect. I'll just show really quick, if I have this run 3 seconds into it with a much longer duration here, what happens in my scene with the audio source. So 3 seconds in, we're going to get our first lightning strike, and we're not going to hear that same cutoff on the thunder. So there's the lightning, there's the thunder. The thunder goes all the way through its thing. It does not loop. It tapers off, and it's done. And then at some point in the next 35 to 78 seconds, it's going to go through its full thing. And that's why it's important to spread it out, because right now we're in a scene, it's raining, it's got some mist, it's pretty cool, but we don't want that thunder playing constantly. We just want it to play enough that we know it's there. Anyways, I hope this has been helpful. If you have any questions, please let me know down below. There's a link in the description to our Discord. There's our next thunder. How about that? There's a link in the description to our Discord. We'd love to have you join us. You can ask us any questions there as well. If you found this to be extraordinarily helpful, there's a series of links in the description from our Patreon to our Twitch. Please click through those. Anything you can do would be enormously helpful. As always, like, comment, subscribe, all that jazz. It really does help us out, and hopefully I'll see you next week.